Wow, so that was Officer Tyler Gross. He's the one that Roy Oliver said he was protecting, but you just heard him say that he didn't feel that he was in danger. So to help us break this down a little bit, we have somebody from Texas who's been both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, Nicole DeBorde. Hello, Nicole.
Hello.
So, can you tell us in Texas, why was this case brought? Because I know in a lot of states, a lot of prosecutors would not have filed charges against this officer in the heat of killing somebody with all that confusion.
Well, an officer doesn't have any special, I guess, privilege to use their firearm. They use a firearm in the course of their job, but they're only supposed to fire it if there's a deadly force called for. The deadly force is called for in the situation. And in this case, the prosecutor didn't believe.
Nicole? Hi. Okay, so Nicole, we lost her a little bit. So what Nicole was telling us here is that really what we have is there's no special advantage for being a police officer unless there's deadly force, unless he feels threatened, or he's protecting somebody that feels threatened. So apparently in Texas it's the same way as other states, but there had to be something more going on here. Maybe it was the age. We'll know when we get back. After our break, we're going to hopefully have Nicole who will break it down just a little more. Stay tuned for a live trial. We're going to be going to court soon. We're watching it so you won't miss a beat. But I have one quick question I'm going to throw to our guest, Nicole. And Vincent Hill is back here to help me. Does it make a difference that Jordan Edwards was a passenger when he was shot? Does that make the liability greater or lesser? Nicole, first, quickly.
Sure, I don't think it makes too much difference at all. I mean, the big question is, should he ever have discharged his weapon at this vehicle in the first place? That's the question this jury has to answer.
Vincent?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it makes too much of a difference. You have to look at the totality of the evidence to see, was there that imminent threat against either that officer, Oliver, or his partner, or the public? That's the bigger question here. What's the imminent threat there?
Okay, so I may disagree with these two, but right now, do we have a live shot in court? Okay, so let's go right back into that court of the trial of Roy Oliver. So what you just are hearing is testimony from another young man who was there at the time Jordan Edwards was shot. His name was Alondre Henderson. And I don't know about you, but I was getting the chills as he's talking about texting his grandma. It just brings to home how young these children were during this incident. So to discuss this incident more, we have another guest with us, police officer Charley Wilkie. Charley, you're in Florida. Say hello, please.
Good afternoon, guys.
And Nicole's still with us, and Vincent's still with us. So what I'd like to do is break down the incident when you have a testimony on Friday from children like this. Do you think that's done by the prosecutor to sway the jury? Is it fair? Is it right? Or is it just what it is? And Charley, could you weigh in as a police officer?
I think it just is what it is. I think that the evidence is whatever the evidence is, and we as police officers have a duty to uphold the law, but at the same time, we have a right to protect innocent citizens, and in this case, it appears that innocent citizens were somehow became a victim of our actions, for lack of a better term. We can't put ourselves in imminent danger to effect an arrest or to justify using lethal force. Either you're justified or you're not, and you can't put yourself in a position to where that's the only option that you have or one of the options that you have when maybe it's not necessary. And I'm not saying that's exactly what he did. I'm just saying that's protocol. That's protocol for every department across the country, is that you have to address the threat that you have at the time. And if you escalate things by leaving cover to go out and put yourself in the open, and that type of thing, then sometimes, we as law enforcement officers put ourselves in a position to where maybe, we leave ourselves less options than we had to start with had we maintained behind cover.
And Vincent, let me ask you this. There's rules and regulations. You can't shoot at a moving car. And why is that?
Well, I think in any department, especially this department, I looked at their use of force policy earlier today when I was anchoring. You cannot shoot into a moving vehicle. But to that, you can use deadly force if you believe there's imminent threat against your life or the public's life. So keep in mind, the police ran out to what they heard were gunshots. We heard the gunshots. We heard testimony that people showed up with guns. So all of that happened in a split second. But what you have to go by is, was it reasonable for Roy Oliver to believe in that split second that there was an imminent threat against his life, the public's life, or the other officer's life. That's what's key here.
And Nicole, let's bring Texas into it, since you are in Texas. I said before, does it make a difference whether the passenger was shot or whether it was the driver? Now, if Roy Oliver was in front of that car and shot the driver of the vehicle, would he be in a different position now than being on the side of the car and shooting into the passenger side?
You know, it really depends on what the vehicle was doing. You know, there has been some testimony that the vehicle was moving toward the police officer, but it certainly doesn't look or sound that way from the footage that we've seen so far in this trial. And to that end, it doesn't matter a great deal whether it was the passenger or the driver who was ultimately shot, because the question is, should the police officer have been firing at the vehicle in the first place?
Well, do you know who that passenger is, Nicole? Could that have been a kidnapped victim that they were shooting at? Does that make a difference?
Exactly. I mean, the intent goes to, when you discharge your weapon, what are you trying to accomplish? And if he is trying to stop that vehicle, this is not.
Well, we're losing Nicole again a little bit. We're going to come back pretty soon for the live trial. There'll be more, I assume, more children on the stand. It is emotional. Please stay tuned with us, because you will cry. It's horrible. So we were hearing from and just heard most of the testimony from Reginald Mickens, who happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. His car had to be stopped because the car that Jordan Edwards was in was backing out. So he saw the police officer, who he described as being mad and stomping, and I don't know if I can imitate what he was doing, coming up, and then, of course, the shots are going to be fired, and Jordan is going to die. So it's a little bit different, but you did notice one thing before I bring the guests back, is that the DA got a plug in there. He said, what did you go to the DA the next day? Because an attorney who was a friend of his told him that he was a good guy. So the DA trying the case got a plug before that jury. But anyhow, do you think Reginald Mickens' testimony adds anything? Nicole, again, you're in Texas. Does it add anything to what we've already heard about whether this is murder, manslaughter, or not guilty?
I think it absolutely does. I mean, saying that the police officer is appearing to be angry either right at the time of the event.
Okay, so you know what? Nicole's frozen again. We don't know what's wrong, but so we're going to go to Charley. Charley, you and I had a little conversation while there was a break about when police officers use their guns. Now, knowing that Reginald Mickens was there in his car also, did that make it better or worse for the defendant on trial, Roy Oliver, to use his gun?
Well, I don't know the exact placement of where Mr. Mickens' vehicle was at, but I certainly could have made it worse. As we talked about earlier, that you're responsible once you engage someone to use deadly force. You're responsible once you pull that trigger, wherever that bullet ends up. So you have to make sure what your backstop is, if there's innocent people around.
Well, backstop is what? What does backstop mean to the rest of us?
Backstop is basically where's the bullet going to end up? What's going to actually stop that projectile when it goes through? Is it going to be a house? Is it a concrete block wall, which is outside of a lot of businesses? When I've seen suspects bail out of a drive-through window, and there happens to be a concrete block wall.
You've arrested a major murderer. You solved a major case in Florida, right?
Yes, ma'am.
The name of the case was what? Tell the viewers.
It was the Cherish Periwinkle case, Donald Smith trial we just had a couple months ago in Jacksonville, Florida. Where
and you didn't shoot him. You stopped this person who would killed someone, and you didn't shoot him, right?
Correct.
So why wouldn't you not execute that person and you have Jordan Edwards being executed? I don't understand. Explain to me what the difference is.
Well, you can be justified. I've arrested other suspects who were wanted for murder. I had one night that had killed 2 people and then fled on foot. My dog tracked him down. My dog had engaged him, and he wouldn't show me his hands. Am I justifying shooting him? Absolutely. He's a murder suspect who's not complying. He may still have the weapon. He ran with the weapon in his hand. He may have the weapon under him. He could roll to his side and probably get a shot at me. But I stayed behind cover and gave my dog a few more minutes to apply pain compliance to where he ended up giving up.
Got it. So here we are in this case. We've heard a majority of the children right now who have testified. We've heard what happened. We heard that this police officer shot into this car, that he was at the side of the car, that he wasn't shooting at the driver. We heard his partner saying he wasn't in danger. We're going to have more testimony when we come out of our next side of our break. I don't know what it's going to add to it, but I hope that everybody listens, stays tuned, because this live trial is just something that is tragic. It's terrible. I told you we're going to cry, and when you think about it tonight, you will cry. We have a little choppiness. Maybe that's good because I don't know how much more of this you can take listening to these children talking about their dead brother, their dead stepbrother. So we're going to take a little bit of a respite, and we're going to try to talk to Nicole DeBorde again. Nicole was a former prosecutor in the state of Texas. She's now a defense attorney. She's been involved with wrongful convictions. Hopefully her Skype is working and we won't have to cut her off. Nicole, hello.
Hi there. Hopefully this works.
Okay, so you've been watching this afternoon. What is the high point for the prosecution and the low point for the prosecution of the witnesses that you have seen?
Well, I think so far it's all been high points. They've done a really good job of presenting this case. They've let each of these witnesses tell a part of the story from a very personal perspective, and I think it's gone very well for the prosecution. So far, I haven't seen that the defense has made a great deal of headway into discrediting these witnesses or to disrupting the prosecution's story.
Well, you're a defense attorney, so what would you do differently? Or is there nothing that can be done differently to represent this police officer?
You know, I think it might be worth spending some time. I mean, certainly I would hate to armchair quarterback, but, you know, it may be worth spending some time on bringing the focus back to the perspective of the police officer, because that is really what matters as far as what his intent was at the time. It would be, I think, important to highlight that none of these witnesses were looking at this situation from the same perspective of the police officer, and highlighting the idea that it was a stressful situation where gunshots had been fired and where a police officer has to make a decision about how to act.
Let me break into you. Does it make a difference for murder or manslaughter? And when you finish, I'm going to ask the same question of Charley. Does it make a difference, murder, manslaughter, or let's say not guilty? Because remember, the state has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. Certainly it could make a difference as to not guilty, because either this was a shooting which was justified and it is not murder, or it was not justified and it is murder.
Well, what about manslaughter?
That's really not so much an issue in my opinion.
Okay.
You know,
Charley, do you agree or disagree?
I agree. I agree with what she's saying. It either is or it isn't. It's either a justified shooting or it's not.
Well, what about a verdict that's a compromise verdict? You know, we see these all the time, that somebody, you know, we adore our cops. We do. This is a hard decision, but we also adore our children, hopefully, in the United States of America. It's a hard decision. So we see this all the time. The juries can have a verdict that may be one that they've agreed to kind of like decide and agree that we're not going to go for murder, we're going to go for not guilty, and we're going to go for manslaughter. So that could happen. It's called a compromise verdict. I don't know who the jury selections was. I don't know who's on the jury, but at some point we are going to find out. But there's a lot more to come. Please stay tuned. I don't know about you, but I needed a little break from Jordan Edwards' death, so we're going to go to the top crime stories of the day. Only can be done as you do it here in Law&Crime. Stay tuned, watch them, and then we'll be back after that.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on lawandcrime.com and across the country. A Miami supermarket tycoon accused of arranging the brutal murder of his wife's former lover was arrested in Spain after years of evading authorities. 64-year-old Manuel Marin, the former co-owner of Presidente Supermarkets, is accused of recruiting a boxing promoter and two mixed martial arts fighters to kidnap his wife's lover, Camilo Salazar. Salazar was found dead with his groin burnt and his throat slit in June 2011. Marin fled to Europe shortly after Salazar's death and has been on the run since. Marin now faces murder charges in Miami. Shannon Watts, the pregnant mother who was found dead with her two children in Colorado, reportedly showed no signs of trouble in her marriage to her accused killer, Christopher Watts, on her Facebook page. 33-year-old Christopher Watts is accused of killing Shannon and his two daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. Before Watts was arrested, he begged the public for help finding his family.
I just want them back. I just want them to come back. And if they're not safe right now, that's what's tearing me apart. Because if they are safe, they're coming back. But if they're not, this has got to stop. Like, somebody has to come forward.
Authorities believe Watts killed his family in the family home and later dumped the bodies on property owned by Anadarko Petroleum, where Watts worked. Watts now faces 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of tampering with evidence. A man in Virginia is under arrest after allegedly shooting another man over who should be cast to play Aretha Franklin in an upcoming documentary. 44-year-old Michael Hatton is accused of shooting 47-year-old Tony Lundy after a disagreement escalated to physical violence over whether Halle Berry should play the Queen of Soul, who passed away yesterday. Lundy is in the hospital in critical condition. Hatton faces multiple charges, including aggravated malicious wounding. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
So we all know that the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, passed this week, and she was great. But what we didn't know was going to happen, that there was going to be a shooting in a barber shop in Virginia. So I want Charlie and Nicole to get ready for this as we take a little respite from the case that we were dealing with Jordan Edwards and talk about why. So why was somebody shot here? Because Halle Berry wasn't good enough to play Aretha. Charlie, come on, weigh in on this.
I tell you, it never ceases to amaze me. I say all the time that people will do whatever they want to other people for their own self-gain. And I guess in this case, he wanted his point of view to be the only point of view, and he would have no other option to that.
Well, what's your point of view? Who should play Aretha Franklin in the movie? Come on, Charlie. I'm going to put Nicole
I think Halle Berry
is
a great choice. I love Halle Berry. I think she'd be phenomenal at it.
Okay, so you would have been what, shot or the shooter? Nicole.
You know, I think the defense in that case is going to have an interesting mental competency defense here, because it certainly doesn't make a whole lot of sense to try to take another person's life or hurt them badly over who is going to play.
But Nicole, that question is, who would you have play Aretha in the movie?
I have to say, Halle Berry does sound like a good choice.
Oh my God, both of you, there's no conflict, so I'm going to have to let Charlie go. Charlie, I understand you do have to go on that note. Think about it. Maybe you'll come up with somebody else by next week. But thank you for being on. Thank you for giving us the police perspective, the honest police perspective, and you are a great cop, and it's just wonderful to speak with you. But Nicole, you're stuck with me.
Sounds great.
Okay, so when we're going to go back to talking about something a little bit more serious after our break, correct? You're all ready for it? Everybody, stay tuned. It's going to be Shayna Hubers, okay? And I asked yesterday on my Twitter account, which was worse, Jodi Arias or Shayna Hubers? Think about it when we go to break. So just like a real trial, sometimes we make a mistake. I made a mistake. We were going to break. We were listening to the testimony in the Shayna Hubers case about how far the gun muzzle was away from the victim, Mr. Poston, when he was shot. And we heard that some of the shots were 6 to 30 inches from the gun muzzle. Now, I remind you, that's the gun muzzle. If this is the gun muzzle right here, I still have my whole arm, okay? So the question is, how far was she away when she said she was threatened by him? So I'd like to bring, if we can, our Texas attorney in, who's both a prosecutor and a defense attorney. Nicole, does it matter the distance between the shots here for the defense?
It certainly can, because these cases are obviously put together with scientific and circumstantial evidence. And if the state's case doesn't hold up based on what they have reported to have been the facts, then the defense has room to fight this. So it does matter whether or not what these people have said is true.
Okay. You're sitting in Texas. You say it matters, right? But then there's a 6th shot to his temple. How does that figure into self-defense?
It depends on whether or not there was an altercation that gave rise to the gun coming out in the first place. And, you know, just because you get in a good shot at the end of defending yourself doesn't make it illegal.
So I think I lost Nicole a little bit here. So, okay, Nicole, you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, so when you say it depends, I mean, if he's lying on the ground writhing, he's no threat, just as the 911 operator said to her, you mean you shot him and you didn't call 911 if you felt threatened? And he can't be affecting her anymore. You're sure that that 6th shot doesn't make it murder?
It depends. It might, but it might also be a continuation of an ongoing threat, and that's really what this case is going to boil down to, whether or not there was an ongoing threat at the time that final shot was made.
Okay, so the jury is also going to hear and has heard from the medical examiner. As you know, we can't play the clips as they're happening, but this is as close to as they were happening. You're getting them here on Law and Crime. We're going to the medical examiner, who's also going to explain the shots. Let's see if we can get through this without just closing our eyes.
Seizures.
We're hearing about how somebody died, how victim Ryan Poston died. He probably had seizures from some of the shots. He was twitching. He was flailing his arms. Now, Nicole, if you are the prosecution, how do you use that to say this was a violent, planned murder by Shayna Hubers?
You know, I think what they're trying to do is establish that the man is down and that he is twitching on the ground in a helpless way, which makes this all the worse. One of the things that I will tell you caught my attention listening to the prosecution's questioning was she asked this doctor to say reasonable degree of medical certainty. The Forensic Science Commission has outright banned that sort of language because it is a meaningless phrase that does nothing but bolster the testimony of whoever's on the stand.
Yes.
It does give me concern that she's reaching like that. It sounds desperate to me by the prosecution.
Well, yeah, but isn't there another side now for the defense? Can the defense say that because he was twitching, he was still a threat to her, or she perceived him as a threat? Is there another side, or is there only one side here?
I think that there's absolutely another side. I mean, she says twitching. The defendant may have perceived that he was still moving and could still potentially hurt them. So this is a real question.
Well, let's see what Shayna Hubers said about this in her own words. We usually don't see a defendant speak, but boy, did she speak, and she didn't stop. She didn't even need to be questioned. So that's Audrey Bolte. She is the woman that Ryan Poston was supposed to meet up with the night that he was killed. He was killed earlier that evening. I don't necessarily believe in coincidences because I think that it's an amazing issue that, of course, he ended up dead before he could date her. But, you know, there are defense aspects to a case, and we have a great defense attorney here, Nicole DeBorde from Texas. Nicole, do you think that jealousy played a role here, or is this irrelevant that he was supposed to meet up with Miss Ohio 2012?
It sure does look like jealousy played a role here, and that's exactly what the prosecutor wants it to look like. The timing of this couldn't be worse for the defendant. It's absolutely a situation that screams jealousy.
Does the prosecution have to prove that she knew, that Shayna knew that he was meeting up with this specific woman? Do they have to prove that to the jury?
They don't have to prove it at all, but it certainly sets the tone for what she may have been thinking and whether or not this was self-defense. I mean, there's a legal principle that's easily put in more common terms that you can't go into a dispute carrying a gun. You can't start the gunfight by showing up ready to have an oral argument.
Just quickly, because we only have about 10 seconds, could she have felt this was abuse?
She certainly could have, and the defense is going to have to lay out a pretty strong case about why she would have.
Well, I think we're going to hear more. We're going to have more in this trial. Stay tuned with us. As you can see, it's been a packed day. Law and Crime has it. Come back. Well, if I'm on that jury, I kind of like Adam. He's like Mr. Personality. I mean, he's talking about a very serious subject here, but, you know, he says my phone is trying to go off and all, although he did say something to the effect of, you know, she looked like $1 million, talking about Shayna Hubers, she was her makeup and all, so it's kind of like a man a little bit. She looked like $1 million. But the important thing about his testimony was that Ryan was trying to break up with Shayna. There was no indication that there was anything else going on, except for apparently they couldn't do it. Whether it was the sex, whether it was the attraction, I don't know what it was. So I'm going to ask our guest, Nicole DeBorde, who is a great attorney, both a criminal prosecutor at one point and now a criminal defense attorney. What do you think about this testimony?
I think it doesn't help the defense. It's certainly being well played by the prosecution. It sort of establishes her as a little bit sort of a stalker ex-girlfriend right from the beginning. And I think the prosecution's doing a good job of laying that groundwork.
You think that she's a stalker as opposed to somebody who was just so needy and wanted to come back to her abuser, as many abused people do?
It could go either way. Right now, we haven't yet heard from the defense as to that perspective. Right now, it looks like she's just actively pursuing someone who's tried to end the relationship.
Well, you know, I always say, Nicole, that when you pick up a rattlesnake, you better learn to hold it by its head so it can't come back and bite you. I don't know who the rattlesnake yet is in this relationship because we haven't heard the whole case, but I have some suspect about it. How about you?
I tend to agree. I'm not sure which it is, but right now it's looking better for the prosecution than it is for the defense. To be fair, we haven't yet heard from the defense.
Right.
So
it better look better for the prosecution. They're in their case. If it's looking good for the defense in the prosecution's case, then the prosecution really has trouble. All right.
Exactly.
So what would you do now if you were the prosecutor? How would you close this out?
I think that I would do everything that I could to personalize the man that was killed and to make sure that the prosecution has laid out every single incident where this woman came and sort of surprised them uninvited. And anything that this particular witness knows about their relationship being over and yet being pursued by the defendant is going to be helpful to the prosecution.
Well, you know, we did hear about a lot of texts that are going on between both the victim, Ryan, and Shayna. But some of the texts that we've already seen was that Shayna wanted to be at the gun range. She wanted to turn around. She said she wanted to shoot Ryan, and she wanted to say it was an accident. I'm not sure how that lays into the defense. I think the prosecution has the upper hand in those texts. But we have a lot more to come. We're going to hear a lot more. Stay tuned.